Okay, so hello everyone. Welcome to Koç University Center for Asian Studies Spring 2026 seminar series. This is the first talk in our series this semester. Our guest speaker is Aaqib Javid Bhat, who is currently a PhD student in sociology at Koç University. Aaqib got an electrical and electronic engineering degree from the Islamic University of Science and Technology in Srinagar, Kashmir, India. And he got his master's degree from Comparative Studies in History and Society program at our university, at Koç University, in 2023. And since then, he has been a PhD student in sociology department at Koç. Today, he's going to deliver a talk titled Debating Islam, Nation, and Belonging, Nigār magazine and Muslim publics in late colonial India. I think, as far as I remember, because I was in his MA thesis committee, this study is based on his MA research and is currently accepted for publication, right? And you'll give that information to the audience. So thank you, Aaqib, and floor is yours.
Let me mute the audio so you can open yours.
Sure.
Now it should work.
No?
I think it's fine. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. It means a lot to me. I have presented this topic at multiple places, but it's for the first time I'm presenting at my university where I have worked alongside with my friends. Thank you so much, Hojam, for the introduction. This research is a culmination of a lot of experiences from 2018 since I finished my engineering. And it finally took this form and it got accepted. It's a section of my MA thesis, which we worked with our friends. And it finally got accepted to Journal of South Asian Studies. And it will be published by Taylor and Francis Group in June. So yeah, thank you so much, Hojam, for being part of the committee and for the feedback and everything. So in this talk today, I'm going to present that paper, also connect it to my MA thesis and make it more simplistic and talk about the topic that I deeply cared about and worked during my MA. So the title is Debating Islam, Nation and Belonging, Nigār magazine and Muslim publics in late colonial India. We'll start with a quote. So in present times, when a common movement against religion is going on throughout the world, Islam doesn't face the question of why it should be saved from criticism of its opponents. But the real question is how it can do away with its so-called advocates and supporters, ulama, the clergy, who are doing real damage to it. There are only two ways to it: state coercion like Iran and Turkey, or mass education. Since state coercion is impractical in India, we must educate the public to distinguish from the practical from the spiritual. He's writing this in 1930s in the Indian context. So it brings us to the theme of Islamic modernism and print. So Islamic modernism, it makes us understand that, how crucial the religion, authority, and public life were imagined in colonial India. And we have to situate, this person, this magazine, this topic in the broader landscape of Islamic reform in the late 19th, early 20th century. Islamic modernism in South Asia is seen as this particular moment in history when certain revival and reformist movements spur. They see themselves in the light of Western encounter because there has been a disruption of rule, British out there, and they're fascinated, or they're taken in by this stagnation paradigm, that how do we deal with such a system and such an episteme. And we see growth of a lot of movements who are trying to reinterpret Islam in this light of a Western encounter. And to understand its essence, we have to understand that with the onset of British rule, the state support that the Islam got, and being a part of state structure, it was dislodged. So it was up to ulama and the people who saw it on themselves that it's their job to save Islam. So counter to the other places, ulama were the first people in South Asia to adopt print technology. And if you want to understand this particular moment, when the psyche was disrupted, Francis Robinson, the scholar on South Asian Islam, he says that these movements, although they originated locally, they saw the difference for this particular instance was that they saw themselves in the light of West and used the tools associated with Western modernity, particularly print, to assess their causes. So for the first time, it resulted in an end to the total authority of past, a new Protestant human will, growing individualism, a rationalization of Islam into an ideology, and a process of secularization. We see spurring of movements, but if you want to broadly understand it, we have movements like Aligarh, there's a school, Deoband, there's Nadwa, there's Firangi Mahal. So all these spur around the same time. Deoband being a prominent one, the alims, like these schools are different, distinct in how they approach reform. Deoband has this policy, it's still one of the most strongest institutions in South Asia. They focused on reform, but with caution. They accepted the tradition, while at the same time being very critical of Sufis and their grave worship. So they, for the first time, set up a university. There's this critical moment in the history of 1857, revolt of 1857, when Muslims are seen as the main actors behind rebellion, and the British authorities simply crushed them while establishing the rule. So for the first time, we have a section of ulama who are like, we don't have to do anything with the state. Our job is to save Islam for the modern times, because if we do not save Islam, we're going to get consumed by the Hindu majority, or we will lose some people to British scientific Western episteme, as they call. So we have Barbara Metcalf, who's a scholar on South Asian Islam, works on Deoband. She says, for the first time, we have an institution which is at parallel with a Western institution. The ulama, the people who teach there, they have salaries. It has a syllabus. There are courses. The funding changes from state to donations. And their aim is simple. We have to reform the inner self. They give up the outer domain. That's the ideology of Deoband. There are other movements like Nadwatul Ulama who are like, we will have a different approach to reform. We will incorporate both scientific temper as well as religious education. And then we have Firangi Mahal. It's a very elite institution, high in Persianate culture. It's catered towards elites. They study, that's in Nizami, poetry, philosophy, mathematics. And then we have a Aligarh movement led by Sir Said Ahmad Khan. And today, the person we're going to talk about is influenced by this movement. They were a very, very minority. They advocated the cause of naturalism. They were so much taken in by the British paradigm that they saw that Islam cannot survive. So we have to reform it in line with reason and science. Reason being Western rationality. They saw it as episteme, that we have to reform Islam. It cannot stand on its own. At the same time, we have movements like Ahle Quran, Ahle Hadith, and all of these movements have something in common, that some ones are institutional, but they also use print as a medium to further their cause. And print is a new phenomena in 1920s, 1930s, and it takes It starts very early in 1840s with the onset of British rule, but I think it really takes a toll when we have the Khilafat movement, and in the beginning of 20th century, and Muslims really take an interest what's happening outside in the Muslim world. So we have this spurring of print culture in the North India, in the North India particularly. So print here is a very important role as a modernizing agent. So it leads to this emergence of a Protestant Islam, the strengthening of pan-Islamic layer, and most importantly, it leads to outflanking of oral systems of transmission of knowledge. So the authority of the alim to teach people is gone. Like the people have very personalized contact with the text. For the first time, we have this increased interest in biographies, travelogues. We have this series of biographies of Prophet coming up, the particular involvement with the text. And what is also fascinating in all of this is that most of these things are happening in one province. It's called UP, United Provinces. It's the most important province in the cultural India, for the Muslims, also for the Hindu, for the India, but more so for the Muslims. They are a minority, but they're a very, very specific cultural minority. And I was working as an intern, so I came across documents, Persian, Arabic, and I was cataloging them, also Urdu. But I was specifically taken in by the print. As you can see, I'm working on the Nigār magazine here. So, cataloging, collecting what's happening. And there were certain magazines which were so rare that they were not documented. And Urdu print hasn't received that much of attention compared to Hindi print after partition. And I have been always fascinated with the Islamic modernism story, like what happens to the Muslim psyche after the onslaught of British rule, because for the first time we see this entire urban Muslim reform phenomena. And how did print play the role in the process? And also I was very much taken in like what happened in partition and why does everything change in colonial South Asia in the 1935? Like till 1935, you look at the magazines, the papers, the popular discourse, it's not about politics, it's about other things. But after 1935, politics is at the center, and that too communal politics. Muslim League is getting popular, Pakistan Demand is being put. And I wanted to understand it through a newspaper, like what was happening on ground and how did people feel about it. And as I said, the entire research is based on my MA thesis. The person we're going to talk about today is Niyaz Fatehpuri. Growing up, he came to this conclusion that religion is a key aspect of Indian society. For any reform, any societal change, you have to reform Islam. And he was taken in by this stagnation, decadence paradigm. And when he tries to understand, he's a very fascinating guy. He sits down, he makes this theory of religion, and he tries to make this rationalized understanding of Islam, in which he's trying to make it more appealing in some scientific sense. And he makes sometimes a caricature of it, and he's trying to understand everything like ilm, ruh, because he thinks that it is so important, the foundations of Islam, that you cannot have any reform. You have to talk about Islam in some way to do any kind of reform. So his whole idea is that I have to make a rationalist, localized Indian Islam. And he thinks that Islam at best is an ethical model. That's it. He is inspired by Sir Said. He takes everything from him, but he's writing for a different time. Sir Said was writing after the failed mutiny in which Muslims were blamed. So he is very pro-British, and he is trying to tell them we are not like Hindus, we're a different group, where we are people of the book, you are people of the book. We have much more in common with you. Our Islam can be rationalized, it can be made natural. So, and his politics is very group oriented. Like he makes this case that Indian Muslims are a specific cultural group. We have nothing in common with Indian Hindus. So him and other Urdu elite, they go and found this college, Mohammedan Anglo Oriental College, which later becomes Aligarh University, which becomes a cultural hub of this Urdu young middle class. And from there, Pakistan movement gets its fire. And so he's answering a different question altogether. But Niaz Fatehpuri is writing in 1920s, 1930s. So he thinks of himself as an Indian nationalist, and he's very, very much inspired by socialists. And he's in praise of Stalin. He thinks that we have the people, we have Jawaharlal Nehru, we have Bose, these people they're going to transform India. They're scientific, they're rational, they are going to, religion is a phase. He was also taken in by this thing. He's like, religion is a phase. Look what's happening in Turkey, what's happening in Iran, what's happening in everywhere. So we will get over it. We have to change Islam, we have to change Muslims. And he thinks that, look at Hindus, they don't have this problem. Like, they can be Hindus and they can be Indian, but Muslims have this problem. They want to have their loyalties with Ottomans, with Arabs, with everywhere except with their own land. He's being harshly critical here. And he thinks that there's only one group to be blamed for Islam going wrong. It's ulama, because there is no such thing as real Islam. It died with the Prophet. What we are practicing right now is some cultural Islam. And with this project, he reads all these Western thinkers, and he thinks that enlightenment is a universal and linear historic process. If Islam is not saved, it will meet the fate of Christianity. And he's very much hopeful. He thinks Islam has this thing, it's very progressive. It doesn't have a central authority. And I had to take something to make this model, and he takes only Quran. He says we have to take only Quran, that's it. And Quran only which I can interpret. So he interprets Quran in his own light, and he says hadith and all these things, they are fiction. They are just Muslims, when they came in contact with other groups, they learned it from them. So if you look at hadith across the Islam, Judaism, everywhere, they're all common. So it makes sense. It's like different cultural groups coming together and sharing the data. In the same way, he's against anything that makes Islam look unnatural. He's like, there are no miracles, there is no concept of wahi, it doesn't exist. When he is pressed upon these things, he gives explanations. He's like, for example, in case of wahi, he says that, no, there is no such angel who comes and tells Prophet, you have to say this. It's just that some people are born with a particular temperament. Prophet was born with a particular temperament, and he thought too much about his society. He was a social reformer. And then he used to, get into this psychological state in which he would utter some words, and those words become Quran. So Quran is a word of Prophet, not the word of God. And Prophet is our role model. And we have to humanize him. He's a human being who is living for his times. And whatever he gave us at that time, it worked for that time. We can only take his ethics and reason, and that's it. You can't expect someone to pray similarly in the Europe and to pray in the East. So he's answering everything, Hadith, Ramazan, namaz, in his own light. And we have to keep in mind that he's a very part of a small minority, very, very fringe, and they're not a part of this elite debate, which is, ulama are the sole defenders of society. Their reasoning is also sound and solid. So at best, they ignore him, but at certain points, they do confront him. In terms of politics, as I said, he's very much inspired by socialists, Indian nationalists, Jawaharlal Nehru particularly. Throughout the magazine, he talks about him, and he says we should believe in this guy. And also at the same time, Mustafa Kemal and Stalin. Now about the magazine. So after doing multiple stints, he starts his magazine, Nigār, in 1922. It's named after Turkish poetess Nigār bint Usman. And he's like, my whole aim is to reform the Qawm. So Qawm is this term which is used for Indian Muslims as a community. See, my aim is to reform the Qawm, and his audience is this newly formed Urdu elite, because Persian has been dislodged by the British. They are dealing much more with the vernacular languages. Urdu is getting standardized. We have Fort William College. We have multiple institutions coming up. They want to have direct contact with the population, and they want to train multiple officers. So Persian is slowly dislodged from the center, and we have these new institutions coming up, like Aligarh, like other places, where this younger middle class goes, and they form this new Urdu elite who take up public sphere. And it's spread from Burma to Lahore, his magazine. And if you look at his magazine, in the beginning, he only talks about culture. He doesn't talk about religion. But over the time, he realizes that you cannot do any reform without talking about religion. And we have Nigār and the author, the editor, they are same. Like, he uses this magazine to basically say everything he wants to say. There are guest authors, guest editors, but they form a very small portion of the magazine. The magazine is controlled in every way by the editor. And what makes this magazine different, of course, it talks about French literature, Arab literature, Turkish literature. It translates the essays. It gives them ideas of culture, religion, what's happening in the world. At the same time, it has this specific section, which is called istifsar, question and answers, where he asks people to give me questions and he answers them. It's through this section I studied. You have an idea what's happening in the larger public sphere. He has competition. He has competition with other magazines, which are also run by religious scholars like Sach, Marif, Zamana, Medina. But he has this, he's not solely a religious magazine. Like, he talks about culture, history, politics, also religion, all the things taken together. And he runs the magazine from 1922 to 1963. He doesn't miss a single edition, even during the war, and when there is paper shortage, all these things, when the finances don't go right for him, he still keeps the magazine up and running. So it's one of the few magazines which are run very consistently by the same author from this time to 1920 to 1963. Now, all of this might sound, very structural in the audience format and circulation, but let's take some case studies and examples, like how did this actually play out in practice? So I take the year 1931. It's for the first time he's starting writing openly about Islam. And he writes this essays about hadith. He says this is all concocted. We're learning from Jews, everyone. There is no consistency. For example, he talks about Constantinople. He's like, okay, this ruler wanted to attack this place. He made a hadith and to get some legitimacy. He talks about Abu Hanifa. He says, why were hadiths, collected after 200 years of Prophet? So hadiths are these sayings of Prophet. So he's saying, why was there a time period of 200 years after which process was started that we have to collect the Prophet, what did Prophet say? And if you look at the early Islamic history, there are all kinds of people. There are people who are with Ali. There are people who are with the first caliph. There is so much politics going on that we cannot really trust anything what's being said in this context. And once he starts writing about these things, after 3 months, I mean, there is a disruption in the United Provinces, in the Urdu print sphere. People first do not take him seriously, but since he's also a good critic, he writes about culture, all these things, people start responding to him. And in taking the lead is this guy, Majid Abadi. He's also a very famous Islamic scholar of Quran around the same time. And he also ran a magazine, Sach, which was in competition with Niyaz Fatehpuri. So it also gives us a understanding that, what was like, how did this print sphere work and what were the religious actors doing? So what they do is, there is this alim from other province who accuses Niyaz of being a kafir, and he says that you should not read this magazine, and he calls for a public boycott of it. And this person, along with the other person, they go to this the ministry at that time, and they tell them that you have to book this person because he's talking sacrilege. They book him under 295, which is still an act in the Indian constitution, in which they try to, if someone says bad things about the religion, they're booked under that act. And they do not target him for any other reason other than their ideas are different. So they have this rivalry going on. So they go to this home minister in the province, and they're asking them, you should book this guy. He has done this. I mean, Niyaz Fatehpuri has to run for his life. He can't do any work for a year. He changes his home continuously. And somehow they reach an agreement in which he tells that, okay, I'm sorry if someone is hurt. My ideas are so ahead of time that people cannot catch them. I mean, catch them with up. So if I have hurt anyone's sentiments, I apologize. I'm also a Muslim. So he does this very tactfully. And then he says, I won't talk about these issues. So he waits for 5-6 months, then he goes again. But then there is the other controversy that happens after 6 months. So the process starts as, in the city of Lucknow, the pamphlets start getting distributed, 10-page pamphlets, in which they talk about Abdul Majid Daryabadi Benaqab. It's the same guy who tried to run Niyaz. So this pamphlet is written by a woman who says that this alim, so-called religious scholar, he promised me marriage, and when he married me, after a month, he basically separated from me. He dumped me. So this pamphlet is so well written that it's very much clear that the person who is behind writing this pamphlet is the Niaz Fatehpuri. So the first thing this author does, this scholar does in his magazine, such he says, I know who is behind this. It's the same author. Where he is trying to have this. Like what we did to him last year, he's trying to take revenge for the same thing. But Niaz Fatehpuri, he first doesn't answer. He says, no, I don't have any involvement. But when his name comes up, then he's like, okay, since you are dragging me into this without me having any effect, let's talk about the pamphlet. Then he talks about the pamphlet for 4 months, and he says, look at these people. They are they are religious scholars. And look, when he's asked, like, why did you divorce this woman, he says, you know what, firstly, I married this woman out of sympathy. She was a widow. That's why I married her. And then it was my mother who said that, no, you can't marry this woman. After marrying her, then I had to give her divorce. He's like, look at these people. They are the custodians of our Islam. And he says, it's not only, and he used it very, very rationally. He says, look how these people work together. All the alims are behind this person. They're telling him, no, you didn't do anything wrong. Prophet also got married and do divorce and all these things. And he's like, this is the condition of our alims. And then he says, we have to separate facts from fiction. He says, if we look at this person, like we can say very much that he did this marriage out of lust, and he's using all these stories. Then he talks about the Prophet's marriage. He says, no, they were a separate context. This happened. They were political marriages. Some of them were never consummated. This happened. But look at this person. He is using all Islam, everything in his own in his own way. So he says that what's happening in India, right? And he brings up a case of other woman in the nearby Hyderabad state. She's like, I have to give up on Islam because Islam cannot give me any rights. My husband divorced me and I can't have any share in the property. So Niaz Fatehpuri says, and he thinks of himself as the champion of women. He gives them space in his newspaper. But there's also a problem. When he writes about the woman, he says, we cannot name the author. So sometimes it's also him writing this and under the name of a woman, talking about the issues that why should women work? Why should they get educated? Why there is no need for a parda? And we have to reform Islam also in this way. So these debates keep on happening. And there is also rivalry, there's also solidarity. For example, the rivalry between these two, it happens throughout their lifetime. 10 years later, they see this alim has been to a cinema hall to watch a movie. And then the other editor of the Medina newspaper, he talks about it. They laugh at him. And he's friends with the Niaz Fatehpuri. And the only thing common they have is that they both support the Indian National Congress. So there are rivalries, solidarities based on politics, religious ideas. So the other part of this paper and this study was what happens after 1935, from theological reform to political belonging. In 1935, British comes up with this Government of India Act, a reform in the constitutional system in which they allow 14% population of British India to vote for the first time. So we have this, in the pink, they are princely states. They are not officially British India. And the yellow ones, that's officially British India. That's directly managed by the colonial administration. In 1935, they go for electoral reforms, and they say that let's try what we can do before the complete independence. So they promise that 14% of people can vote, and the provinces will have some autonomy. So there is electoral competition starts. With this act, the first elections take place in 1937, and as usual, Congress Party wins 9 out of 11 provinces. And Muslim League is nowhere near the equation. But we see something common happening in the Urdu print space, that religion, communal ideas, they take up the front space. everyone is talking about them. So I wanted to see how does this author, this news magazine go about it. When Congress gets its first ministries, they have their own idea of how to work around India, and they're facing this pressure from Muslim League and Muhammad Ali Jinnah, who accuses them of being communal and not representing the entire Indian Muslims. They make up their own constitution, their own model, and they want to have a pilot mode in these provinces in which they have one autonomy. They have some powers, but not all powers. So they say, let's reform, let's give a map of future India, what we want to do. The first thing they propose is language reforms. And the second thing is educational reforms. In language reforms, they say that Urdu and Hindi, they are basically called Hindustani. They are spoken same, written differently, but they are same. It is the same language. So Muslims write it in the Arabic script, Nastali, and the Hindus write it in the Sanskrit script. So Congress Party says, our language right now, it has so many foreign words. We need to purge it and make some uniform. We can have both the scripts, but we need to have a uniform language. And at the same time, we need to have a new educational scheme, which is, and both of these things are heavily inspired by Mahatma Gandhi and his very close right-wing Hindu nationalists. At that time, Gandhi has issued, he thinks of India as a civilizational state. So he says we need to have an education model which talks about history, basic common code, basic education in the vernacular language. So that doesn't go well with Indian Muslims, where ulama play a huge role, where Muslim League is a new party, landlords, all these groups. They are not okay with these reforms. They say, there is a prejudice, and it plays out in the province we talked about, UP. The Congress Party does series of reforms in which they take away reservations for Muslims. They purge the Arabic and Persian words. They keep the Sanskrit words. For example, if they say Kanun, Nafiz Karna, it's a very common word in Urdu. Everyone used to speak like this. They change it to Kanun Lagu Karna. Like this, change some specifics to. And Muslims are like, okay, this is something we are seeing right now. When the British leaves, we are a minority. We are going to be taken over by this Hindu nationalist thought in which our culture and their culture, it doesn't match, and we will have to live by the same thing. And same for the education scheme. They come up with names like Vidya Mandir. Mandir is the temple. And they have these songs which are nationalistic, which talk about Indian civilization. And somehow Muslims feel at the margins of it. So we'll try to see the same place, like how does this person navigate these changes in the print section, since he's a committed member of Indian National Congress and he has his love for Jawaharlal Nehru. So he thinks of these things, and since he's an Urdu writer, he says, okay, I have a problem here. You cannot change the Urdu language, Why are you doing these things? And he blames Mahatma Gandhi. He says this guy is a dictator. So he always talks about, Hindu religion, Hindu culture, Hindu this. We are living in the modern times. We should be led by people like Nehru and Bose, who can have this socialist model like Soviets, and we can transform Indian society. We have bigger problems to deal with rather than to go in the past and look for some glory. He accuses Gandhi of being very close to capitalists, which is true. He was very close to Birlas, and he thinks very sadly of Jawaharlal Nehru. He's like, okay, look at this guy. He's so young. He doesn't have anyone around in his party. He wants to do so many changes, but he is a minority. But I'm sure as people join more and more as people get more educated, he will become powerful and he will do all these changes. Regarding the education scheme, he says there is no issue with this. Like, why should Muslims have a problem with it? You are getting your children taught a common language, a common education model. They are getting to know history. If you had to teach them a religion, teach them at your home. So we are trying to create the modern subjects of a state. And he's not very much fan of Muhammad Ali Jinnah and the Muslim League and this movement. He thinks this is it. This is the movement. These people, somehow we are trying to get Muslims out of this Muslim mentality. And these people come over and they're like, we're a separate nation. We have this history. We have this idea. Let's go and let's form this our own country. He says, look at these people. They are all capitalists. They are all landlords. They have this one person called, Muhammad Ali Jinnah, who is a, cult figure. And what happened in the Khilafat movement, it's going to be much more worse. He's not a fan of Khilafat movement. He's like, Muslims should not have extraterritorial loyalties. If you're Indian, you are Indian. It should mean something. And he tells Muslims, you should join the Congress party. Like, if you have any problems, this is based on the series of, editorials and how people write to him in the magazine that, why are you doing this? Why are you not doing that? And his idea is that, all these issues, cow sacrifice, government jobs, these are not big things. Think of the bigger picture. And of course, it doesn't go well with the people. And he does receive quite flank. So, for example, people tell him that we respect your sentiments. Why are you so keen on, you should have your sympathies with Muslims. Your supporters are, there are some readers or supporters of Muslim League. If they stop reading your paper, what's going to happen to you? So all of a sudden, in the print space, we have these names, Lahore Resolution, Pakistan Movement, Muslims, Hindus, cows. This is the whole, like, if you look at the magazine 10 years ago and now, it's only politics. But one thing that stands out with him is he takes all the criticism, analyzes it over the months, and he says, I will answer this criticism. If someone has to say anything, keep on writing to him. And months later, he comes with his own response. He says, okay, I have been trying to do this thing for 20, 30 years now. And he thinks that we have a bigger problem here. He says, the core issue we have is with the Indian Islam. He says it's a failure. We couldn't synthesize Islam with India. And he thinks, like, not unlike Hindus, Indian Muslims always had extraterritorial loyalties. They will always feel pain for Arabs, for Ottomans, for every other group other than Indians. So he's very sad and very angry at the same time. He says that, look at the separate electorates, look at the Khilafat movement. Why is this obsession that we are special? They want to go back to some past, glory. There is no such thing. And he says that it's ulama, because they have this thing, they are anti-rational, they are very exclusive, they have this superiority complex, that why should we be with Indians, with Hindus? He says that we still have time, we should treat religion like it's a transition phase. We're going to have a stage like Soviets, where this thing is just a passing phase. It will go away, and we will have scientific revolution and all these things. And he says, look at the Pakistan, scheme. What they are saying that we have a group of people. Just a second. Yeah. So he says that these states who are at the border and these states, they are Muslim majority. Half of Muslims British India live here. Okay, it makes sense for them. But what about the Muslim minorities who are spread throughout India? What's your answer to them? It's half the population. You can't take everything into the new so-called Pakistan. And he tries to critique Muslim League in every possible way. He says, okay, and because Muhammad Ali Jinnah at that time, he didn't want, like, there's a very contested debate about partition, what really happened. But in the popular literature, the thing is that he used Muslim sentiments and Muslim politics as a bargaining chip. He was trying to get a better deal for Muslims. That's a popular argument by historians like Aisha Jalal, in which like there are series of talks that happened from 1942 to 1947, what's going to happen with India. And he plays his card by saying that we're going to have a separate country at the end. In between, he's talking about multiple models. His first model is that we need to have a weak federation. Every province needs to have its own autonomy, Muslim provinces particularly, and minorities need a special veto when we form a common parliament at the center. And the Muslim minorities in other provinces, Hindu majority provinces, they should get some special rights. If we do not do these things, we will form our own country. According to Fateh Puri, he's like, no, this is not the case. Like, because he thinks like a socialist, he's like, we are trying to create one India under Nehru, in which the center is dominant, and all these things are going to disrupt us. That's what the Congress Party says all the time from 1940s, 1947. And that's one of the reasons why Nehru was more than happy at the end to give away Pakistan. Again, he played his even the founder of Pakistan, he was a bit shocked. If you look at the debates very closely from 1945 1947, even he didn't expect it to happen. It was a bargaining chip, but Nehru was like, okay, if you want to have Pakistan, you can have it in the way. And he expected it will, collapse. So this person writes about these things. He says, all of your demands right now, they don't make sense. But he's writing against the popular sentiment. All his readers, all the Muslims in throughout India, particularly in the UP, where they are a minority, they are the bedrock of Pakistan movement. They are Urdu elite. They are the transmitters and carriers of this message everywhere. But he keeps on saying that, okay, even if you make a Pakistan, it's going to be socially unstable. You are trying to bring up people together, a Baloch, a Sindhi, a Pathan, who have never lived with each other in a form of nation state. How is that going to happen? And then you have Shias and Sunnis, and you are leaving half the Muslims here, half the Muslims there. You will always be a Western vassal state, and you will always have this threat from India at the same time. So it's not going to happen. It's going to be completely unstable. And at the same time, you are leaving Indian Muslims to Hindu majoritarianism. So these debates, like they are, at the core from 1937, when the Indian public sphere gets heavily politicized and communalized. These debates are happening throughout till 47. And Fateh Puri, he stays in India till 1962 till 10 years. And he keeps on writing from there and gets the highest civilian award. But in 1962, he shifts to Pakistan without explaining. It happens with multiple people like the Jamaat Islami, the political Islamists, which are a very important political party in Pakistan right now. And they officially control the narrative of Islam and everything. Their founder, Maududi, like he was one of the people who also criticized Pakistan's scheme very vehemently, but also among the first people to go to Pakistan once it was formed. That was the irony of it. So to conclude, Islamic modernization in South Asia, it was not a unilateral process. It was a multifaceted process and a very complex process. Colonialism and the idea of West, it had disturbed the Muslim psyche. Print was one of the very important, element as a modernizing agent in the dissemination of ideas. And as we see here, political belonging was not inevitable. It was always talked about in the papers. And at the same time, there was no uniform Muslim response to Pakistan movement. There were people who had different thoughts, different ideas about what it meant. It was also with 1937 elections and when Congress got to run the autonomy of some provinces that it mobilized Muslims and it transferred the support from Congress to Muslim League. And Nigār as a magazine should be seen as a site of contested Muslim identity, plurality of political intellectual life in the Urdu public sphere. And this person is among the minority, like he's not a dominant major thinker. They are a minority like with Sayyid Ahmad Khan and other rationalists, but they did participate in the public sphere and did eventually, shape the outcomes. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Aaqib. So,
yeah.
Floor is yours, and if there is anyone want a question from Zoom, they can also ask. Yeah, please. I have a couple of questions. So, first question, did you say Nias Fateh Puri, right?
Yeah.
Did you say Fateh Puri did not support the Khilafat movement?
Yeah.
Did not
support.
It's very interesting because Gandhi supported it.
Yeah.
Gandhi, one of the big landmark events that made Gandhi the leader of the Indian national liberation movement. Gandhi capitalized on the Khilafat movement, which was a movement of Indian Muslims, but he capitalized on it and he, really engaged with it. So it's one of the probably most positive things, right? He did at that time try to create some kind of Hindu-Muslim unity. So what do you think about this contrast? It's a very interesting contrast. That's my first question. The second question, so detail. Did you say he got an award?
Yeah, Padma Bhushan.
What was that award and why they gave that award to him? And finally, you said he migrated to Pakistan in 1962. And he kept publishing magazine until
1963.
63.
Yeah.
So didn't he provide any explanation about his decision? And
I was the best.
so after 63, he didn't write anything until his death in 66.
He transferred the magazine to his other disciple,
Mhm.
Farman Fatehpuri,
Mhm.
who took over the magazine. And he just focused on the literary aspects. He didn't talk about religion.
Totally avoided the Pakistan issue.
After 1963, he doesn't talk about
So,
these things.
so it's a mystery, I think. I mean,
Yeah.
okay. So these are my three questions.
Yeah, thank you so much, Hojam, for the questions. With Mahatma Gandhi, Hojam, you're absolutely fine. I mean, most people do not know about it, but Mahatma Gandhi became Mahatma Gandhi because of Khilafat movement. Like he came from outside, from South Africa. He took over this. He saw this not opportunity, but he saw this case in which Muslims, they needed a leader, a popular figure who was not among them, so who could be this bigger voice who can carry everyone. Gandhi came over, took over, and saw himself as this leader of Indians, in a way, projected himself as the upcoming leader of Indians. And a lot of people had problems with that. Firstly, all the secular nationalists, among them at that time was Muhammad Ali Jinnah, the founder of Pakistan, who was a very constitutionalist. He was the first one to criticize. He said, this is very problematic because this guy is bringing politics, he's bringing religion into politics. Like we have to fight British, but we have to fight them in the constitutionally, not in this way, because these people right now, they are saying all this, Indian civilization, Ram and whatever. But once the British leave, they're going to need someone to fight, and they will fight Muslims. So that's why he gets disheartened and he leaves India and he goes to London. Then he comes back later with a different story in 37 and leads Muslims. Niyaz Fatehpuri is also among those people. He first has a lot of respect for Gandhi. And at that time, he's still young. He's working around with other magazines. He hasn't started his magazine, Nigār. It is not that dominant at that time. But he says this is a good guy in the beginning. This guy is talking about unity and all these things. But since he starts developing his ideas about religion and Islam in particular, he says, no, this is a problem because this guy is the other side of equation. He's not talking about, scientific temperament, revolution, all these things. He has this idea in which Gandhi has his book, series of lectures, forgot the name right now, and he talks about his idea of Indian state. Like, what is the Indian state? He gives a critique of Western civilization. And he said this person is a problem because he's trying to bring in religion again to the equation. And all these Hindu right-wingers, they're very much okay with Gandhi. And they have a problem with this part of the Congress party, which is highly educated, rational, scientific. And he starts having issues with Gandhi, and it becomes a beating dog. He's like, okay, Jawaharlal Nehru is such a nice person. He wanted to do all these things, but he cannot do it because he's a minority. That it's Mahatma Gandhi who is controlling everything in the Congress party. This is his answer to Muslims who ask him, why are you supporting all these people? So he has his problems with Gandhi as the Indian politics gets more communal after 1925, 1930. But initially, he was a fan of Gandhi. He talks about him in the beginning of magazine, 1920s, 1920, 1923. He has problems with Khilafat movement. He thinks this is not a unit of, like Muhammad Ali Jinnah. This is a very problematic movement because you're trying to tell Muslims that you are separate, you are distinct, you are this, you are that. This identity will get reified. And it creates more problems because Khilafat movements made Britishers realize that, okay, this is a very powerful group in India called Indian Muslims, and they need to be protected with separate electorates. So Indian electoral system had this, quota-based understanding that all the Indians would vote and the Muslims would vote separately. So this, for Niyaz Fatehpuri, was the beginning of the seeds of partition and religious communalism. And Hujam, for the second thing, he received the award Padma Bhushan. Nehru had this thing that he always, promoted or encouraged Muslims not to leave India and stay in India. And he always had an open policy till 1965. And Niyaz Fatehpuri did contribute to Urdu language and literature, his poetic essays. It's all about religion, but if you look at very closely in the magazine, he talks about culture, he talks about poets. He has his special numbers which come in January, where he selects a poet and he talks about his life, his poetry, and he compares it to other arenas. He's a very good essayist, critic also. So he gets the award for that. And in 1962, something very strange happened. Like his wife has passed away. He's facing other issues, and he, without a proper reason, and Farman Fatehpuri doesn't also even talk about it in the biographical essay, he just shifts to Pakistan and gets quiet and stays there until 2 years after he passes away. Nawajam.
Thank you. So I'm wondering whether there was also the same kind of multivocality on the Hindu side. You made a good case that the multiple meaning identity is constructed as a result of this negotiation. Without taken. But I'm wondering what was happening on the other side, on the side of the majority, and I'm wondering whether what was happening on one side was connected to the other side, or whether these people were kind of, sailing in the dark, unaware of, of what their own compatriots were doing, and just basically taking in all their cues from Paris, London, and maybe also Istanbul.
Okay.
I think at some point, it would be useful to look at that contrast, because I mean, it's one thing to say that these identities are negotiated. It's almost like the starting point for talking about identities anyway. But how negotiated are they, and are there different patterns of negotiation? That's so that would research project for the future, which as your dissertation advisor, I am not involving.
Thank you.
At this moment, it's just something for you to consider at some point, because I think that's the process.
Thank you so much. Of course, this for the first point, the Hindu side, this is all happening together, and so Muslims get this separate acuteness that the political consciousness comes with the formation of Congress Party first in 1880s, and Congress Party is a party for everyone. It's started by the British urban party, and then it goes through its transformation in the 1900s. Gandhi comes over, more people join in, middle class joins in, it becomes larger and larger and larger. And in 1920s, 1930s, there's a lot of things are happening, not only in the Muslims, also on the Hindu side. Like we had the rise of Hindu nationalists for the first time. We have people like Vishwa Hindu Parishad. We have RSS starting its foot roots. They're getting inspired from a different group of people in Italy, in Germany. All these exchanges are happening. But what really is kind of for Muslims, that like this acute consciousness, it has always been a part of their psyche. And it's a part of a debate. Like there's this famous Brennan debate between a political scientist and a historian, C.A. Bailey. They talk about the same phenomenon. They're like, was it a strategic move that happened in the 1937 that these people sought an opportunity, the Muslim elite? They're like, okay, we have a better deal. Let's switch and change sides and go to Pakistan. Because it changed very flashily in one moment. But the historical reasoning given by the other person is that no, they have always had this historic acute sense of vulnerability. And as Congress got bigger, as it consumed more people, as it took more people, it was not one party. It became this one big party, one big family, which had in which there were internal negotiations going on. What a Congress party looks like, it had its right wing, it had its left wing, it had its centrists. And once Gandhi takes over, there is this feeling that Congress has become Hindu. And Muslims take on this, and the alims, the ulamas, they use print, they use everything. Like, there's this problem going on. We might be dealing with a different person because it's not some constitutionalist or something. This is a common person like Gandhi who is using all these vocabulary and, all these protest formations, and we are one civilization. And we have tolerated our Muslim brother and they are our brother. But I think the word used is tolerance in the civilizational sense when they talk about the historic ache. And these people have ruled over us. And this thing somehow, and Congress Party being more lenient towards right-wing people. Like there are people who are part of right-wing groups, and they're at the same time part of Congress Party. The Muslims are like, okay, things are changing. Then one big moment happens in 1935 when the reforms happen, electoral reforms, constitutional reforms, and whatever privilege the Muslims had in terms of in their jobs, they're like, let's have a new deal. Let's give you jobs based on your population, not on your identity. That also further disturbs the Muslim psyche. So this all is happening together, and they are writing about each other at the same time. The Hindu groups, the Muslim groups, everyone's presenting their model. But Congress has this thing that since it's a part of it represents the majority, it never says it's a Hindu party. They're like, we're talking about India. So they try to make Muslim League as something separate, like they're small identity party.
Can I ask you something?
Sure, sure.
Like, Hinduism, I mean, we're taking it for granted as a single thing, but that too is a historical construct. Until the British arrived, the Hindu didn't know
Exist, yeah.
It's like, I mean, it ends in ISM, ism, right? That's the signal right there. So, the construction of that, unity out of all these separate cults, all over what is a place that is, they call it a subcontinent, but it's really more than that. So did this precede this whole process that you're describing here, or was it still going on at the time? Or were the Hindus still trying to figure out what it meant to be a Hindu, the same way that the Muslims were trying to figure out what it meant to be a Muslim?
Yeah, I think for Hindus, it's a very good question, actually. For Muslims, it became much more simpler because once they articulated their political question, they're like, okay, we are not Hindus. That was their definition. When we have we have to figure out our own things, but they can wait because right now we're fighting for our political, economic, every interests. They wait till 40s, till the partition. For Hindus, it's a very immediate question. They are a majority. And then there are very influential groups like the Bengalis, where they're the first people to get westernized in a way to get British education, all these thoughts. All the reform movements, it starts in Bengal, Kolkata. And they have this problem because once the identity gets consolidated through the census, through the British rule, this of caste system, which is a very important part of Indian reality. And the problem is that Congress party is predominantly a casteist party, even in the functioning of it. So, for example, there is this issue that happens in 1930s, where the leader of so-called lower castes, Ambedkar, they're called lower castes at that time by the Hindus, untouchables, and they are a majority of Hindu population. And this guy comes over, he's well educated, he doesn't get a seat in his daily functioning. He sees how it happens. He's like, okay, wait for Hindu, Muslim, and all these things. We have a different problem altogether. So he says, he goes to British and tells them, he has his own mobilization consciousness. It's a very important project. He goes to British and tells them, you know what, you are giving Muslims, in 1935, this happened when the constitution is being changed. He tells them, you are giving Muslims a separate identity. Why not us? Give us a separate electorates. And British are like, this makes sense. But who is the person who goes against all of this? It's Mahatma Gandhi. He starts a fast. He says, I will die if this person doesn't take away his demand. How does he say that we are not Hindus? He launches whole reform, high vocabulary. We're all equal. They are Harijan. I will work with them and all these things. And he really tries to fast till death. And all the Congress party people, including Tagore and all these big people, they go to this person, Ambedkar, tell him, why are you doing this? Are you trying to kill our leader? And this guy is under pressure, immense pressure. He gives up this project because Muslims are telling him, Jinnah, like, yes, it's your time. Ask for your rights. And if you ask him later, after partition, everything, he said, I made a mistake. I should have not trusted Gandhi in that way.
Was that before or after they massacred Buddhism?
It was before that. And then they're like, we can't have any hopes here. This is not going to work. Because after partition, he was also happy with Pakistan in a way at the end. He's like, okay, since this equation is gone, now we can do our politics, which is the politics of Indian universities right now. Like if you talk about, it's not only leftists, it's also, so-called lower castes and Dalits and all these people. But they were all identity formations of every kind going, but this was the major one.
Thank you so much. It's been a great presentation.
Thank you.
I'm from the law school.
Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much. I teach international law, so my question will be connected to that partially. I wanted to ask you if you you could expand a bit more on the idea of you mentioned the extraterritorial loyalty.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you, is that also, because it feels like from the way you were portraying it in the text that you analyzed, there's also a sense of loss in that sense.
Yeah.
I wonder if that also qualifies in many ways as a loss of like internationalism, because it feels like there was a global transnational network that the authors that we deal with felt part to, also thanks to language. Because it's such a fascinating, I think even today, in the debates on nationalism, that sense of loss of internationalism is, yeah, I think it's quite relevant. And I am not very familiar with your literature, but it's one point that was raised by a lot of scholars on the African continent, specifically on creating ideas of nationalism and nationality during the decolonization. So like the Pan-African project was both a national project, self-determination, but also a project of international. So I was curious about how your authors navigated this and what's your perception. And also, I mean, I have another question about how did you end up doing this from engineering, but but in terms of, I imagine that, you know, going from such a degree to an archive, you must be quite aware, acutely aware of textual technology as a means to transmit knowledge. So I wanted to ask you if there was
in Pakistanis. So I opened the magazines. I was fascinated by the conversations, and imagine it's a beautiful palace. You know, you are working in an archive. It's a different life altogether. You're just reading throughout the day. These archives, taking notes. You have a lot of people working for you. So it's really, I keep mentioning my friends. It's a very fascinating experience altogether. And in that thing, I was like, okay, there's a pattern here. Like, you know, in 1930s, 1940s, I see that this articulation, like, you know, Pakistan, this moment, and this family was also associated with the Pakistan moment. So what, I mean, it connects to your first question, was there an idea of loss? I mean, the whole Indian Muslim story after the collapse of Ottoman Empire, or after the collapse of, I mean, there were bigger moments like the starting of British rule. It was the first bigger one, and the second one was the collapse of Ottoman Empire. It's the whole story is about the loss. Because once the Britishers started, and it was seen as an attack on Islam, Muslims, despite being a minority, were a very powerful cultural group. They never thought of Islam like an institutional setup or something. It was a part of daily life. They were the ruling majority, ruling people. But once Britishers comes in, there is this idea that you are different, and all of a sudden we are this so-called people, you know, we will treat people equally. We have Hindus, we have Muslims, and Hindus happen to be the majority of this country. So they get the more treatment. So Muslims develop this idea of acuteness of being vulnerable, and they look for any symbol, any identity that can help them. That's why they associate themselves with the Ottomans. They send, as you know in history, they send a lot of gold, a lot of things, you know, which young Turks used very well in the beginning, and, you know, then turned against them. That's a separate story. And they're very sad when the Khilafat is gone. That's how the Indian nationalism, that's one of the biggest movements of Indian nationalism. It was started by the Muslims. Gandhi came out of nowhere. He took over the movement, hijacked it, and made his, like, you know, reach the dominance. That was the reason why Britishers had this first reform in India, in which they gave Muslims separate electorates, all these things. And everything you read in that time period, it talks about loss. All the poetry you read, all the novels, everything at that time, it talks about loss of cities, loss of culture, loss of identity. So there is acute, that was my first thing, you know, this Islamic modernism and all, like, what happened to the Muslim psyche? That was my biggest thing I wanted to understand. And no matter if you are talking to a revivalist, you are talking to Ahl Hadith, you know, a naturalist, or anyone, they're all trying to grapple with the question, what do we do now? You know, we can't somehow fit this mainstream. And that story takes on till 47, and then you have the partition. And that question is even still now unresolved, because you have half of Muslim population in India right now who are also confused in a way, you know, why do they belong? Same for the Pakistanis. The people who did not vote for Pakistan, they ended up getting a Pakistan. The people who voted for Pakistan, they ended up staying in India. And you have these issues of Kashmir and all these things continuing to this day. So identity remains a question. I hope I answered yours. Yeah.
Alexis, Roger has a question. You can read it.
Can you
Yeah, I can see. My question concerns the afterlives of the figure and the journal. How is he perceived today in India or Pakistan. Thank you so much, Hojam. So Hojam was my advisor for the MA thesis. So Fatehpuri, he received the award from India, and he also received the award from Pakistani government after his death. And there was no state patronage for Urdu at that time in such a manner. But he was invited even before by the Pakistanis in the East Pakistan that you can come over and work on Urdu and everything. But he did not go in 50s, but in 60s, all of a sudden he shifts to Pakistan and continues Nigār for a year, then hands it over to Farman Fatehpuri, who runs it till 2013, till he passes away. But he makes it back to a cultural journal. He talks only about culture. He doesn't talk about religion. He's not concerned with those things. He says he's a very pious Muslim and doesn't want to talk about these ideas. But he has respect and reverence for Niaz Fatehpuri. And these people, I mean, how is he perceived in India today? A very marginal figure. Someone, I mean, in Pakistan, they, where these reformists talk about things, they do mention Niaz Fatehpuri Nigār in the same line as they mention Sayyid Ahmad Khan. But after the relative Islamization of Pakistan after 70s, so these people are almost nowhere. Like they're very fringe, and whenever they are taught in a very not in a good light. Who these people are, what they did, but at the same time they are respected for their contributions to Urdu language and literature. For example, Pakistanis had this very problem as a state how to deal with Sayyid Ahmad Khan. More so, not the state, but the right-wing groups who have hijacked the idea of Pakistan right now. Because for them, Sayyid Ahmad Khan is the founder of, in a way, of Pakistan. He fought for the institutions, separate electorate. So they have to respect him. He's like the original founder. But at the same time, he's the person who was like, we have to make Islam rational, all these thoughts. So they have to accommodate and negotiate his identity also.
I have a
Sure.
question statement. This is a great talk, by the way.
Thank you.
So you talked about how when he was trying to get back at Daryabadi, that was his name, right? Majid Daryabadi. That he said he had a woman come forward with her story, which he inevitably wrote. And then there was a back and forth there. I wonder if in his work, because he is one of the people, at least I remember from my research, that talks about and is in support of women's rights, against both in the Hindu context and the Muslim context, but specifically the Muslim context, because in that time there was also the whole women's question of what is the role that a woman has to provide in both religious communities. I was wondering what were the things he championed and how was it received by, say, the Ulama Party, because you have different people on the other side that would also talk about and champion women's rights, but in the form of new patriarchy, talking about how they are these goddesses or they are these higher beings in Hindu and Islamic context. So I wondered how he talked about them and how was it received in dialogue with these other people like Daryabadi, if there was anything you came across.
Thank you so much. It's a very interesting question, a very important question. Also, I remember the point with professor's question that Niaz Fatehpuri became a fringe element because he didn't have any institutional mechanism. Like Sayyid Ahmad Khan had Aligarh Muslim University. Even now his ideas are, circulating, not in the same manner, but his name sustained the time. Niaz Fatehpuri was someone who wrote from somewhere, a small magazine, and after partition went to Pakistan, and that was his story. So he's remembered for his magazine and without any institutional support. With the woman question, it's a very important question in the Nigār. So Niaz Fatehpuri thinks, since he's talking about, he is this great thinker in his own light, he has to solve the Indian Islam problem and he has to solve the Indian Muslim problem. He has to look at society, what to allow, what not to allow. So he has an interesting take on a woman question. So in the beginning, he says, I'm the first one who has allowed a woman to write in my magazine. But there are higher chances that he has written the article himself because, it's, he doesn't mention anything. And if you look at the rhetoric, everything, it's very much him. So he says that, okay, he's constantly making comparisons with Europe. That also was, one of the groups in India at that time. He thinks, okay, our women, we are not same as Europeans, but we are different, but we have to cultivate that differentness in a different way. He says for, parda, there's no need for parda. It's just, you're making it a big deal. He gives the economical argument. Women have to work. That's how economy works. The cultural argument. If women are educated, they can raise good children. But at the same time, he's like, women should not read romantic books or poetry because they have to be the good mothers. So that's his way of, dealing with the woman kind of question. And he does propagate this idea, and he has women supporters at that time. From the princely state of Bhopal, there is this princess who keeps on writing him, appreciating him. He is a bit nuanced. He thinks he's a champion of Indian women, but at the same time, he's like, okay, you can do this, but not this. Your job is to be a good mother.
It's like the other side.
Yeah, but with it wasn't received very well, of course, because he was seen. I mean, his image was in the circles. He was always, pride upon. Like people were like, okay, look at this guy. He's talking blasphemy. He's talking these ideas. The first response was, let's not take him seriously. It's just some guy somewhere writing something, trying to get our attention to the issue. But over time, they have to engage with him. He forces them to engage with them. There's a high chance sometimes he makes up his own issues in the newspapers, and he focused on some complete different fact, which is very provocative. And then he says, okay, someone asked me a question like this, which cannot be proven at that time. Did he really even ask him a question? For example, when this pamphlet episode started, why does it point to the person? Because 1 month before, all of a sudden in the magazine Nigār, there's talk of women's rights. Like out of nowhere, he talks about women's rights, what's happening to women in India. People are marrying, and then leaving the woman. And in the next month, there are, pamphlets throughout the city accusing the other religious scholar of, by a woman that he promised to marry and they didn't marry. So it wasn't well received in that context, Niyaz Fatehpuri. But it was a very marginal part of his project, but he was very vocal about it also at the same time. Like whenever instances he had, he said, okay, I am, the champion of like women rights or something in his own way. I hope I answered your question or missed on anything.
Any other
Other
questions? If not, I would like to thank Aaqib for this excellent presentation.
Thank you.
And for your participation.
Thanks very much. Thank you, everyone. Joining from Zoom.